Hi everybody, we are in Masechet Eruvin, Daf Yod Chet. We're starting the second perek today. We're going to be seeing a Mishnah talking about making brackets around a well in order to carry there, and we'll have some discussion about that. And that will lead to a series of Agadot from Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar, very interesting and some famous and fascinating Agadot. So that's the two parts of the daf today. So we start with the Mishnah at the end of the Yud Zayin Amud Bet. It says as follows: Osin pasin la beraot. Beraot is plural of be'er, meaning a well or a spring, something that is fed by natural underground water. And so if you have a spring that's in the middle of Reshut Harabim, and on Shabbat you want to draw from it, so there's a special dispensation. Obviously, you could make walls around it, but that's a lot of work. And so the rabbis were extra lenient regarding giving people access to water. And so they said, so rather they instituted that one can make instead just 4 corner brackets, and that would be sufficient. These are kind of symbolic walls, pretty easy to make. And then the passers-by, the travelers, they can stop here, they can draw water and carry it within this area, drink it, and then they can go on their way. So they are called, you see they're double brackets, so that's where they're called, as the Gemara will say today, dio, meaning duo, two panels. So there are 4 that, since each one is doubled, it looks like 8. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir, however, says, Shemona nir'in kishnem asar arba'at yomdin ba'arba'at peshutin. They say, no, you need to have, Rabbi Meir says, one needs to add an extra one. So in between, you need one straight one. So that ends up having these 4, plus the other ones that are 4 doubled, which is 8. So altogether, it's 12 boards. So we see that Rabbi Meir is a little bit more machmir. We're going to see that in another opinion as well of his. They have to be 10 tefachim high. Each board has to be 6 tefachim wide, and the long, and the width of it, in other words, the thickness of it, can be any amount, even a tiny bit. וביניהן כמלוא שתי דבקות של 3 בקר דברי רבי מאיר. And the space in between one and the other, according to Rabbi Meir, is only 3 bakar. So in other words, when you have 3 oxen that are harnessed together, and so you have 3 going this way and 3 going that way, and that would be 6 altogether. Gemara later will tell us that the width of each oxen is 1 2/3 amot. So divide that by, multiply that by 6, and you get 10. So the space from one corner to the other can be 10 amot wide, but no bigger. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda omer shel arba. Sometimes when the ground was very firm, they would put together 4 animals with each other, right? Get 4 ox power, and in that case it would be a little bit wider. So Rabbi Yehuda is more lenient again in this case, in this item as well, and says it can be 4, which you multiply 4 times 2, because 8 animals each going each direction, 8 times 1 1/3, and 1 2/3, and you end up with 13 1/3. So the space between each post can be 13 1/3. Kishurot velo mutarot, achat nichneset ve'achat yosef. And when we measure the oxen, it's when they are tied together and not when they're loose, so it's a bit smaller. And we assume that we need space for 1 entering and 1 exiting. Good. That's why it's double. Mutar lakrib labe'er bilvad shetehe para rosha veruba bifnim ve'shota. And now, what if we want to make it smaller, right? How small can you make it? How close can you bring these brackets to the well? Well, it says the smallest is enough that an ox, its head and the majority of its body should be inside while it's drinking. Okay. Mutar, so that's the smallest. How about the biggest? And how big can you make it? You can make it as big as you want, as long as you put a board every either 10 amot or 13 and a third amot, according to each opinion. And as long as you have those in a regularly spaced, you can make it as big as you want. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad bet sa'atayim. Rabbi Yehuda, however, is machmir on this point, and he says no, up to 2 bet se'ah, 5,000 square amot. That's the maximum. Amru lo amiru bet sa'atayim ela lagina v'lakarpef. Aval im haya dir o sahar o mukse o chaser. Afilu bet chameshet korin, afilu bet asara korin, mutar. The other sages told the Rabbi Yehuda that no, the limit of bet satayim is only a place where people do not live, like a garden or an enclosure where you store things. However, if it's a place where people or animals are active, a deer, a sahar, or mukseh or chaser, right? Backyard, courtyard, a place to a pen for the animals. All these things are usable living space. In that case, afilu bet chameshet korin, afilu bet asara korin mutar. And so since this is used by animals, you can even a bigger area one can enclose with these, as long as there is water inside and you need to access the water. It's special leniency for water. So again, this is a repetition of what we said above. You can make it as big as you want, as long as you have the enough posts all around to fill in the gaps. No gap more than either 10 or 13 and a 2/3. Okay, that's the Mishnah, and okay, interesting law, special leniency for access to water. Now what we're going to do in this discussion is we're going to quote three other opinions that say something about this law and see.
Sorry, Rabbi. Sorry. What about the gap between the walls and the well? What's the distance there? Is there a limit? You mentioned the cow and its body being
right.
fully...
So the limit, right? The minimum is that the cow and most of its body and head have to be away from the edge of the well, right, to the wall. So that's the minimum distance. Right. Okay, good. Okay, so
Rabbi,
yes.
Sorry. With Rabbi Yehuda, there's only corners. So he says 10 amot. So we have from corner to corner, between the panels on the corners. But for Rabbi Meir, who says that we need the middle panels also, is he saying the 13.5 between the middle panel and one of the corners, or is it still 13.5 between the two corners?
I believe it's from the spaces, but that will be clear tomorrow, right? Tomorrow's going to discuss the further about the spaces. Okay. So let's return to that question when we get to it. It'll bring all the calculations and all that on the next daf. Okay. Gemara. Lema matnitin de la kehananya detanya osin pasin labor vechabalin lashayara vechananya omer chabalin labor avalo pasin. It seems that the Mishnah does not agree with the opinion of Hananya, who says in the Braita that you can make these pasin for a board, and you can use, the first opinion says you're allowed to use the corner brackets for a board. Board is a cistern, also a source of water. Chabalin, the shayara, and you can use ropes, those horizontal ropes, for a caravan, as we saw in the previous perek. That's the Tanakama, right? And that fits with our Mishnah. However, Hananya says you can make the chabalin for a board. You have a source of water, a cistern. You can use the ropes, but you cannot use these corner brackets. So you see, he does not allow this leniency of corner brackets. So this seems to be that he does not agree with the Mishnah. Is that true? It could be the Mishnah doesn't have to follow him, but the Talmud would prefer if his opinions followed him. Says no. Okay, here's an important distinction. There's a difference between a board, which is a cistern, and a be'er, which is a well. you see, a well always has water, right? It's a perennial spring. And so because it always has water, right, you don't have to have worry. There's always going to be water there. And so therefore, these brackets will always be permit carrying there. The problem with the cistern is that there isn't always water in it. A cistern depends on rainwater during the winter season, and then it's used up right over the summer. And by the end of the summer, it's going to be empty. And here's the problem. When it's empty, then these corner brackets no longer permit one to carry there. However, once you allow it, people will get used to carrying there, and they're not going to say, oh, the cistern's empty, we better stop carrying. And so here's what Hananya was making this distinction, because he says, bod, where our Mishnah says, be'er. So he could be consistent with the Mishnah. He only said here that one cannot use the corner brackets for a cistern, which sometimes is empty, but he would agree that you can use the corner brackets for a spring. Okay, good. So I think that's a good answer. And now we have another version of the answer. It's the same thing, it's just more expanded, more explained. לא קטני חנניה אומר עושין חבלין נבור ופסין לבאר מכלל דלחנניה לא שנה בור ולא שנה באר. חבלין אין פסין למה מתניתין דלא כחנניה. Okay, so another version here says, since Hananya did not say that we can use ropes for a cistern and the corner brackets for be'er, right? And that was our conclusion. But he didn't say that explicitly, so that means he says it's not allowed either way. He just never allows using corner brackets, not for either one, right? And therefore, the Mishnah would not be consistent with him. But we answer, over here in this Baraita, Hananya was only responding to what Tanakama said. Since Tanakama said, mentioned board, he said, no, you can't use it for board. But the be'er, the spring, never came up. And that's why he didn't address the spring. But he would agree that the spring is fine. And you can use the cornerback brackets for spring. So we resolved the problem for Hananya. So now the second Tana we're going to question. Lema matnitin de la kedevi akiva titnan echad be'er harabim ubor harabim o be'er hayachid osin dahen pasin aval bor hayachid osin lo mechisa gavoa 10 tefachim tibre Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva in a later Mishnah says both a spring that belongs to the public and to private, and a cistern that belongs to the public. He's making a distinction between public and private. Why should there be a distinction? Well, if something is public, even if it's a cistern, when the cistern empties out, since it's a public area, once it empties out and you can't carry there anymore, everybody will remind each other, hey, it's empty, don't carry here. So therefore, the Rabbi Akiva says it's okay if with a cistern as long as it's public. But a private cistern in your own private property, you're not going to remember and no one's going to remind you. And so he's machmir in that one case. So if it's a private cistern, right, then Rabbi Akiva requires a wall. So perhaps this seems to be not in accordance with the Mishnah, because the Mishnah made no distinction. It just talked about making corner brackets, and it should be okay for any case. Or actually opposite. The Mishnah talks about wells that are okay, and maybe we can infer that wells are okay, but all cisterns are not good, right? Which is actually the conclusion. That's what we said for Hananya. So if we apply the same explanation here, then this would contradict Rabbi Akiva. But we answer, Afilu tema Rabbi Akiva ben mayim chayim tepesika le lo shena de rabim lo shena de yachid. Katani bor de yachid. Katani bor mechunasin de la pesika le la ketani. Okay, so we can reconcile with Rabbi Akiva. A living water, a spring. That's what we were talking about. That's what it mentioned. So in that case, it doesn't matter whether it's public or private. And so that's why it mentioned that case. but a cistern that with gathered water was not mentioned at all. So that is just it doesn't contradict the Mishnah. The Mishnah just simply did not talk about that case, and that's why it didn't need to make a distinction between public and private. But in fact, maybe it could reconcile. Okay, good. So we reconciled Rabbi Akiva, and now the last one. Lema matitin dela Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Itnan Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava omer en osin pasin ela lebe'er harabim bilvad. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava is the most stringent. He says it's only allowed in one of the four possible cases. Only if it's a cistern, if it's a well, and it belongs to the public. So then for sure, it always has water, and if just in case something happens, it's in public, and so people will remind each other. Only in that case is it allowed, not in any other case. And there's but our Mishnah says all wells are okay to make these corner brackets, and even if it's private. So this seems to not be consistent with Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. We answer this to Afilu Tema Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava mai bera'ot alma. When the Mishnah says wells, it means general wells. Most wells are in public areas. I was talking about the standard case, but indeed it could be interpreted as being public only and not private, and then it would be consistent with Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Okay, good. So that concludes this section of the discussion of the Mishnah. And now we're going to get into etymologies and some interesting agadot. We begin with two etymologies with the word that comes from Greek, duo, and then now in Hebrew, dio. So what does this mean? My dio madin. What is the etymology of this word? Corner brackets. Amar Rabbi ben Elazar dio amudin. It comes from two, dio as in Greek, amudin meaning walls, two posts. They are double posts. Others say that actually the whole thing is in Greek, diophoros, which means a double. No, sorry, wrong word. That comes from Greek, that didumon, which means a double or paired. And so perhaps the entire word is Greek, or according to the B'nai, it's half Greek and half Hebrew. Okay, good. So that makes sense. And once you mention one, we're going to mention another word, dio. Okay, this is a mnemonic for the upcoming items. Since the Talmud was always studied by heart, so the mnemonic to remember the order of the statements, we're going to have a lot of statements in the name of this third generation Amorah, and the mnemonic is Dio Limnude, is the one who was ostracized. We're going to see that's Adam Arishon. Shevach Zunit Nit Kalkel Bemida Shelosha Siman. Okay, we have this in mind as we go through and match up each one. Tanan hatam. Rabbi Yehuda omer kol hashitin peturin chutz min hadei yufera. Okay, when you have these figs, the inferior figs, they're not so edible, or they're edible, but they're not. They're very cheap. So these figs are permitted to eat if they're demai. In other words, if you buy them from a simple farmer and you're not sure if you took tithes or not, in general you have to take tithes again. But because these are so cheap, we assume that the farmer did take tithes. If they're expensive figs, then the farmer, say they're worth $1,000, the farmer's going to have to take out 100. Doesn't want to lose $100. But since these are only worth $1, so to take out 10 cents. Is no big deal. So we assume that all these figs, inferior figs, are okay to eat, except for one kind, and that's the diufra. What is the diufra? Amar Ola, Ilan Haoset Dio Perot Bashana. It's a certain biennial tree, and these things do in fact exist. There are fig trees that produce a second crop during the winter, as you see in this picture. They're not very good, not very edible, but they do exist. And so this particular one, diufra, is pretty good, better than the other inferior ones. And so therefore, this one, you would have to take ma'aseh if you're not sure if it was taken before. Okay, good. So once we mention that, here's another duo. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar, Dio parsuf panim haya lo la'adam harishon, shenemar, Ahor v'kedem sartani, keti vayiben Hashem Elokim et hasela. Vegomer Rav Shmuel Had Amar Parsuf Had Amar Zanav. Okay, so he says that Adam Harishon was created with two faces, back to back or front to front, right? His head on two sides, one man and one woman on the other side, and they were attached. Why does he say that? Well, the pasuk in Tehillim says, God, you created me, and this is attributed to Adam saying it. You created me front and back. Peshat is probably simply that means that God, you created me totally, right? Everything, head to toe, front to back, right? I'm entirely in your control. But since it does say right in front and in back, so the Midrash concludes that. And furthermore, since we know that there's a kind of contradiction in the first couple of chapters in Bereshit, did God create one or two? This would resolve the problem because here God created. God created one being, but the one being was a dual being. So when it says God created even Selah, the word Selah popularly understood as rib, but it really means side. And so this would make sense that he had two sides. This first being Adam had two sides, and God then separated one side from the other to create man and woman, Adam and Chava. So it resolves the Pesukim as well. Okay, so this du parsuf is actually subject to machloket amoraim between Rav and Shmuel. One of them said that Adam Rishon had two faces back to back, but another said zanav, that Adam was a person, regular person in front, and on the back he had a tail or some kind of extra appendage, and it was out of that tail that Hashem removed it and created Hava. Okay, so these are the two opinions. And what we're going to have now is a discussion about this. We're going to have 4 challenges to the view that says that Chava was made out of a tail. And then we're going to have 1 challenge and 1 question to the other view that she was made out of an entire face, that she had a whole side to her. Okay, good. Bishlama lemanda amar parsuf, hainu dichtib achor v'kedem sartani. So if you say she was a face, right? Adam had two faces. Then the pasuk makes sense, front and back. You created me. But if it's just a tail, what does it mean? You created me front and back. I mean, the tail is still a back. It's not its own being. So they can explain the pasuk in an entirely different way. That says, God, you created me first and last. Last meaning you created me to be as the last thing in creation, right? A man was created on the 6th day after all the animals, after everything else. That's kedem. But sorry, that's achor. That's the last thing. But kedem, the first thing, the first to be punished, the first being to be punished was also Adam. Hold on, is that true? Okay, we understand that Adam was the last to be created because he was created right before Shabbat started, after all 6 days. But what do you mean he said to say he was the first to be punished? It's regarding the sin in Gan Eden. First, Nachash was the first one to receive punishment, and only then Chava, and only then Adam. So he wasn't first for punishment there. He was first for punishment at the flood. Right, God wiped out everything from man even unto animal. So you see, man is first here. Okay, so that resolves that challenge, the challenge from the pasuk to this point of view. Second challenge. The one who says that Chava was originally a face, it all makes sense. Vayised is written with 2 yods. So 2 yods just to hint to the 2 faces. But one who says that she was originally a tail, what's these 2 yods, right? It's nothing special that needs 2 yods. Shimon ben Pazid, Rabbi Shimon Pazi, or li mitzri, or li meoseri. The 2 yods are significant, but nothing to do with about creation of 2 faces. Rather, it's coming to tell you that you can read this in 2 different ways, right? Vayised can be read as yetzed or as yotzed. And so, right, people, we are constantly in between a rock and a hard place, right? Woe to me from my inclination, evil inclination, and woe to me from my creator, right? If I go and follow the evil inclination, then I'll have to answer to my creator. And if I answer to my creator and do good thing, evil inclination is always bothering the person to do evil. So the two yods represent the two inclinations in a man and a person to do evil or to follow his creator. Okay, so we answered the second challenge. Third challenge says God created man and woman, right? Which means that sounds like there was a woman at the beginning of creation. So that makes sense if it's two sides, two whole sides, including faces. But if it was only a tail, that's not a being in itself. It's not a female person. So what does it mean that God created male and female? We can answer it with the statement of Rabbi Abahu, Damar Rabbi Abahu, Rameketib, Zacharun Keva Bera'am, Uktiv Ki Besel Melokim Bara Oto. Right? There is a contradiction itself, and I mean, here's quoting one pasuk from Bereshit Perek He and one from Bereshit Perek Aleph. In fact, if you look even like within Bereshit Perek Aleph, it says Vayivra Elohim et Adam besalmo besel Elohim bara oto, and then Zacharun Keva bara otam. So here you have he created him singularly and then plural. So there's a lot of difficulty in understanding this. So he's going to come to explain that. That the Almighty first had in mind in his original plans to create two, Adam, a man and woman separately, but then thought about it further and decided to only create one. Okay, it's obviously very interesting and anthropomorphic, right? Would it mean God to change his mind in the middle? But I think what it means is it's giving you an origin story, right? If something was once even thought to be a certain way, then that shows that that's the kind of the original, the ideal. So God really wanted to have two, but I think maybe it means that he saw if he creates man and woman separately, then they'll be two separated. And so he created them in actuality as one, and then separated them. That way, this explains why people are attracted to it. Men and women are attracted to each other and want to get married and come together and then become one again. As in the continuation, right after Chava is created, they reconnect and become again one. So therefore, we are as now separate as God originally meant it to be, but he went through a process of first making them one so that even when we're separated, we will always seek after our original mate because we were one at one time together. So I think that's the idea. That's what he means. This is actually quite significant because there's a parallel to this idea in Plato's in Plato's dialogue, the Symposium. It's in the speech by Aristophanes, in which he talks about how mankind was originally, some of them were round and whatever, he describes the whole thing, and they had two faces, right, back to back, man and woman, and then Zeus separated them. Okay, it's a whole long thing there, which is has a lot of similarities. But more important there are actually the differences. You see that the whole point of this midrash is to say man and woman were once one, and therefore, even though they're separated, we should come back together. So it's promoting the ideal of monogamy between a man and a wife. And the Greek version, we don't have time to look at it now, but it's promoting a lot of other models of relationships that obviously the Abahu would have rejected. And so I think by showing that there is a parallel, if Rabbi Abahu did know about that widespread story that the Greeks, I don't know if he did know it or not, but if he did, and he purposely limited it and changed it, and applied it to these Pisukim, first of all, it explains the contradiction between the Pisukim, and it also expresses his ideal of why marriage works. Okay, that's all interesting class in and of itself. But now we get to the fourth challenge. Bishlamad damar parsuf, hainu dichti baiskor basar tachtenna, ela lamad damar zanav, mai baiskor basar tachtenna. Pasuk says that after Hashem did surgery and and took off the side, he closed up the flesh. So if it's a whole side of him, then obviously this is a complicated surgery and had to close up a lot of flesh. But if it's only a tail, so what's the big deal? No, even for that, the place of incision, whatever that tail or appendage was, still needed stitches to close up, and so it still refers to that. All right, good. So now we resolved all of those questions. Now we can turn the tables around. According to the one that says originally Adam had a tail, so God had to build, where it says Vayiben et hasela, God built from that one piece, had to build an entire person, Hava. So that makes sense, that word Vayiben. Elaman damar pasuf, my Vayiben, but if it's just a face, what's being built? The answer is Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya Tadaresh Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya Vayiben Hashem et hasela מלמד שכלאה הקדוש ברוך הוא לחווה וביאה לאדם הראשון שכן בחלקי הים קוראים לכלאיתה בנייתה. The Vayiben refers to the fact that after Hashem created Chava, he went and became like a hairdresser. Right? We heard of a lot of metaphors for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but this is a new one. Right? And he braided Chava's hair so that she would be beautiful when she came before Adam, and he would be attracted to her. And in the islands, the hairdressers are called builders. And so therefore, Vayiben is not a reference to her being built. So the one that says that she was a whole side, she didn't have to be built, but she did need her hair done. That's what it refers to. Okay. ויבן השם אלוקים, אמר לכיסתה ועמדי לה במתיתה תנה, מלמד שבנאה הקדוש ברוך הוא לחווה כבניין אוסר. מה אוסר? זה רחב מלמטה, חסר מלמעלה, כדי לקבל את הפירות, אף האישה רחבה מלמטה וקצרה מלמעלה, כדי לקבל את הוולד. So in this case, it means Vayiben refers to her, the shape, her shape, that she is like a structure of a storehouse. Storehouses were made, storehouses for fruit and for grain were made wide on the bottom and thin on top, and that way you wouldn't have a lot of weight of the fruits on top that would be crushing the ones on the bottom, so it becomes narrower on top, so there's not as much weight. And so too, a woman has to hold a fetus inside, and so that shape would be ideal also for her to store the fetus. Okay. ויביאה אל האדם, מלמד שעשה הקדוש ברוך הוא שושבינות, לאדם הראשון מכאן לגדול שיעשה שושבינות, לקטן ואל ירא לו. So then it says God brought her to Adam. Maybe that's where they're getting the thing about braiding hair. You know, he had to be the matchmaker too and convince him that to go out with her. So this teaches that God was the shushbin. That means a good friend or the best man. He also had to make the wedding plans and make them happy. And so therefore this teaches us that we should never feel that's beneath anybody's dignity, even for a great person to go and dance with and take care of the needs of a bride and a groom, because after all, even God did. And this is codified in one of the Sheva Barachot, right? Sos tasis le'ima ovim kesamechacha yisirecha, and so on. Good. Now a question. According to the one that does say that Adam and Chava had two faces back to back, which way did it walk? Right? Forwards or backwards? Plato resolved this by saying it rolled around, but it didn't even walk. It could go very fast. Okay, but our question is which one went forwards and which one had to go backwards? It was like on New Jersey Transit, right? When you get the backwards facing seat. אמר רב נחמן בר יצחק, מסתברא דזכר שגיא ברשע דתניא, לא ילך אדם אחרי אשתו בדרך, אפילו אשתו הזדמנה על הגשר לסלקנה לסדין, וכל העובר אחרי האישה בנהר, אין לו חלק למבע. It must be that a male face is the one that went forwards, because we have a baraita that a man should never follow after a woman, because she looks attractive, and by going behind her, then it will lead him to having immoral thoughts. Even if it's his wife. Well, why even if it's his wife? Well, maybe people seeing him won't know that's his wife and suspect him. Okay, what if you're in a tight spot, you're going over a bridge, and so it's not so easy? Well, in that case, you should hurry up and overpass that woman so that you would be walking in front of her. And if you do this, if someone walks behind the woman in a river where she's lifting up her skirt so it won't get wet, and so that is particularly obnoxious, and that person does not get a share in the world to come. So if the author of this baraita was living today, he would talk about people going to the beach and would think that was very inappropriate. Okay, תדור רבנן, המרצה מאוד לאישה מידו לידה או מידה לידו, בשביל שיסתכל בה, אפילו דומה למשה רבנו שקיבל תורה מהר סיני לא ינקה מדינה של גיהינום. Okay, along the same lines, someone who is counting out money to pay someone, a woman, and he goes and counts it out into her hand, right? Counts the coins, and he does this only because he wants to have an extra couple of minutes so he can look at her face and derive pleasure from it. Even if that person is as righteous as Moshe Rabbeinu, that person will not be cleansed from the punishment in Gehinnom. And it says about him, Yad liyad lo yinakeh medina shel Gehinnom, right? Paying out from hand to hand is an evil thing, right? We should not treat people as sexual objects, but always treat them with dignity and therefore respect modesty and privacy. Okay, Amar Nachman Manoach Amaretz Haya. Okay, along the same topic, good statement about interesting statement about Manoach. This is the father of Shimshon. Shene'emar vayakom vayelech Manoach achare ishto. This is that famous story. The angel comes to Manoach's wife and says, "Oh, you're going to have a child," and so on. And Manoach is all upset that the angel didn't come to him. And finally, he comes again and says that Manoach went after his wife. So it sounds like he's following his wife. So you see, he didn't know this halacha that you're not supposed to walk behind your wife. See, he's amaretz, right? He's an ignoramus. The truth is that there is some chat about this, because you see that, he didn't appreciate the angel, he didn't believe it was an angel, and he had to only follow his wife's path in order to be able to have any access to this divine prophecy altogether. So I think this pasuk actually does mean to demean Manoach. Okay, but we're putting it very literally that he was walking behind her. Matkif la Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak ela me'ata Abel kana tichtiv vayelchel kana hare ishto achina meh. So fine, maybe Manoach was Amaretz, but you're going to say the same thing about Elkanah, the father of Shemuel, because it says about him also that he went after his wife. Okay, this is a problem here because there is no such pasuk that says Vayelchel Elkanah hare ishto. So Tosafot asks this and says you should not. It's a wrong Girsah. You should not read it. Perhaps it's referring to another pasuk that says he went to his house, and his house is his wife, and it means something like that. In fact, if you look at the manuscripts, the manuscripts do have several variants, right? So here's one where the Ravaz explaining, quoting a pasuk that does exist, but adding an explanation of how it works. And there's other versions that quote things more correctly. So we see that Tosafot's it's still a lot of difficulty with this, but the manuscripts do in fact support what Tosafot said, that there is a Girsah problem here. Okay, but in any case, if not Elkanah, then we have Elisha, right? So the mother of the child who needed Elisha's help, he says, come and help me, and Elisha follows her. So he was walking after her. Are you going to say Elisha is Am Haaretz? Nobody would want to say that. Rather, regarding Elisha and Elkanah, it means that they followed her words. She requested something, and he did what she requested. They follow her advice. So here too, we can save Manoach and say it means he followed what she said, not that he physically followed behind her. Okay, so that's a possible answer. Whereas Rav Asher is going back to the original point, and that the first opinion that says he was in fact the Am Haaretz, not only did he not know this baraita and this halacha, he didn't even know a pasuk. He didn't even know something that he learned in first grade. Right in Bereshit, tichtib, atakom lipkav v'na'aroteh v'tirkabna ala gemalim v'tilachna acharei haish v'lo lifnei haish. Right, regarding Rivka, they go before the person, the Eved Abraham, who went to bring them. Right, so she goes in back of him, not in front of him. Well, I mean, it had to be that way because only he knows the way. But still, this is the proper protocol. And see, Manoach didn't even know this pasuk, so you see how ignorant he was. Okay, good. Still on the topic of walking behind. Now other things. Better to walk behind a lion and not behind the woman, right? A lion is obviously very dangerous, but walking behind the woman is even more dangerous. Better, but it's not the most dangerous. Better to walk behind the woman than to walk behind idolatry, right? That's even worse. That will certainly lead to idolatry. And better to walk behind idolatry than to walk behind or right in front, walk past a synagogue at a time when they are praying, because there one is actively showing that, oh look, they're praying inside, and you just walk by, shows that you don't care, you don't want to pray, you're kind of denying the tenets of the tefillah. And so that it looks like all this is is true, but also a setup for the last one, which we would think isn't so bad, right? Saying, be very careful. Now, what does this mean? You can never pass by a Bet Knesset if they're praying. What if you're going to another one? So Halacha L'Maaseh says that this is okay. If there's another Bet Knesset in town, another minyan, another time, or if it's obvious that you're not snubbing it, but you're carrying a package, you're doing something, and it's obvious that there's another reason why you're not going in to pray, then it's permitted. So this explains why even if you're on an island by yourself, you should always build 2 Batei Knesset, right? That way, even if you pass by one, you won't be violating this law because you can just say, I'm going to the other one. Okay, good. Okay, back to our sage. This is another statement that he taught. הואיל הוליד רוחים ושדים ולידין, שנאמר, ויחי אדם 30 שנה ויולד בדמותו כצלמו. Pasuk says that Adam lived for 130 years, and only after that did he have a child in his likeness, right? Shet. So what about all the time before that? All the time before that, when he was in exile, he gave birth to different spirits and demons. And this female demon called Lilin, right, plural of Lilit, which she is a lot of stories that are said about her later. Right, so since he only had a proper child by 130, it means before he had improper children. Okay, hold on, we have a question about that, a contradiction. Hayad b'meir omer, Adam rishon chasid gadol haya. כיוון שראה שנכנסה מיטה על ידו, ישב בתענית 130 שנה, ופרש מן האישה 130 שנה, ואלעזר זה תאנים על בשרו 130 שנה. Meir also said that Adam was very pious, and after he sinned, so he made teshuvah, and for 130 years he fasted. It means during the day he fasted, and he separated from his wife. and he wore fig leaves, which are kind of prickly. Also, midah keneged midah, according to one who says that the fruit he ate was a fig. So he wore this uncomfortable belt in order to afflict himself. So you see anyway that he was separated from his wife from all those 130 years. So therefore, how could you say that he gave birth to demons and things? Answer is, oh, that's talking about the discharge that he had inadvertently, and that's what, even though he wasn't with his wife, that created these demons. And so that's where it came from, although he did separate from his wife. And I wonder, maybe it would have been better if he stayed with his wife, and then he might not have had all these problems. Okay, but this is a very important source. This is a source for the custom today. In some communities, that sons do not go to the cemetery for their fathers because of all these demons that might attack him there. But that's a Kabbalistic custom. But this is the source of that idea. Okay. ואמר רבי ירמיה בן אלעזר, מקצת שבחו של אדם אומרים בפניו וכולו שלא בפניו. This famous statement, one should only give, in the presence of someone else, one should only praise, give a little bit of praise. But when you're not in the person's presence, then you give full praise. In other words, not proper manners to praise someone totally when you're in front of them. Hashem said to Noach directly, I see you are a righteous person. But when Noach wasn't there, right? So we see that Noach was in fact all these things, but Hashem to his face limits it. Right? It's not embarrassing to say so much praise about a person. So the same sage, now another thing he said was when the dove came back and had an olive leaf that it plucked off, taraf, in its mouth, right? And so Noach knew that the waters had gone down. And I was saying, I would rather eat food that's bitter, like an olive, but get it from you directly, than be reliant on people to feed me, even if they would feed me honey, right? Better always to be independent, dependent on God only, and not be dependent on others. So I guess, I don't know, I guess that means domesticated animals are not as happy if they are dependent for their food on their owners. Okay. Any place that has Torah learning at night will not be destroyed. As Yirmiyah says, nobody would say, where is my God, if he sings to God. And singing is another term of speaking Torah. אמר רבי ירמיה בן אלעזר, מיום שאחרי בית המקדש, דיו לעולם שהשתמש בשתי אותיות, שנאמר כל נשמה תהלליה, hallelujah. In the Bet HaMikdash, they used to use God's full name as it was pronounced. But after the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, we no longer pronounce the full name. And so they need only the letters Yud Keh for the shortened version of God's name. And finally, אמר רבי ירמיה בן אלעזר, נתקללה בבל, נתקללו שכניה, נתקללה שומרון, נתברכו שכניה. So he says, when Babel was destroyed, its neighbors also were cursed, because once after it was destroyed, the land was full of wild animals that bothered all the people, all the neighboring people as well. So you see how terrible Babel is. Even if in its destruction, it caused harm to others. However, when Shomeron, meaning the north of Israel, the northern 10 tribes, when they were destroyed, its neighbors were blessed because the pasuk says, it turned from a heap of rubble to a place for planting vines. And so, although Shomeron was sinned and was punished and destroyed, but still, if we remember them for good, with a good reputation because of the positive things that did come from their land afterwards. Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen, Amen. A lot of very interesting agadot there.